Welcome to episode 33 of JesusCoffeeBarbells. Amber and I are going to continue our conversation with Dale today. We kind of left off on episode 32 because it was a very long conversation, so let's go ahead and dive right back in. Me and you have had a conversation before, and I'm going to bring Amber in on this, about how Christians talk to non-believers. I think I was talking to you about something. I don't know if you remember what it is or if you even remember this conversation. We were talking about how Christians, when they talk to people about Jesus, it seems very arrogant because it feels like they have like the right answer when the non-believer obviously doesn't think that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you have experience with this in particular? Have you had people just be like, you're wrong?
In which scenario? When I was a Christian or as a non-believer?
As a non-believer.
Oh yeah, sure. Like as soon as I came out as gay.
I guess that's true.
As soon as I came out as gay, I had lots of people that were just like, the religious devout. They're just like, what you're doing is wrong and you are going to hell. You need to get your act together and, get out of that mess and get back with your wife, take care of that kid, blah, blah, blah. Like I had it a bunch for sure. Or just mentioning to people in different conversations in different passings where I was playing disc golf in Cleveland, and there was a guy it didn't look like he really knew what he was doing or where he was going. And I played a few holes, but I went back to the beginning to talk to him just to be like, yo, have you played at this course before? And he was like, not really. It's like, cool. Like, we're going to play together and then I'll show you the route and all the holes and stuff. And so we started playing. Turns out he was like a pastor in some church in Texas somewhere. And so then we started a conversation about like where he was coming from. And then I gave him my background. I was very open, and I don't mind being open with anyone. I don't really care. I just find it fun to talk to people regardless, because I like philosophical and deep conversations. So even though I was like anti-religion at the time or just like a non-believer, it doesn't mean I'm not open to talking to religious people or even talking to people from my past religion. You know what I mean? So he was, he was a pastor, and I started talking about my background and growing up, and I was a minister, but then I came out as gay. Now I'm not really in religion anymore. And so even in that conversation, it was all very civil, and it was nice talking to a Christian that wasn't coming from a condemning point of view. A lot of it was very open and compassionate. He was coming from like, oh my God, I can't believe like how hurt you must have been when all this happened, or blah blah blah. And he was very compassionate. Like, and that I just feel like the way that anyone talks to someone, regardless of whether you're trying to be persuasive or conversion or whatever, compassion has to be like the delivery. Like that has to be your delivery system, is compassion, especially if you want anyone to hear you out. So yeah, I mean, like I definitely had good and bad conversations when it came to what I was doing, whether what I was doing was right or wrong. I had people attacking me or just people being as helpful as possible and as compassionate as possible. So I have experienced that. And it has been refreshing, to say the least, to come across those types of people and to come across those conversations. Which brings me to something that I wanted to talk to both of you about, actually. And that is when it comes to, because I know that when I was in religion, this seemed to be a way of dealing with people. And, scripturally it talks about it too. So, I mean, it's scripturally backed that when you do try to talk to somebody and witness to them, and if they're not receptive to what you have to say, wash your hands, leave and move on, kind of a thing, like that you're not really going to stay and invest in that person. And so, my question to the both of you would be, when it comes to who you choose to invest in, do you find it valuable to invest in people that aren't of your way of life?
I think it all depends on where I'm at in life as far as like my seasons. So, short answer, yes, I do believe it's important to invest in non-believers because I don't think they will listen to me otherwise if I don't invest. But also, Jesus calls us to love others, to he sat at tables with sinners. He invested in people. That is what we should be doing. We should be following his example. But it's hard. It's hard in my day-to-day life because the people I've surrounded myself with are believers, because these are the people that are going to lift me up. They're going to support me. They're going to give me feedback in what I know is valuable and true and won't bring my spirit down, if that makes sense. But when I do come into contact with non-believers, I try to make it a point to reach out to them, to talk to them, but I don't want to like shove anything down their throat, right? So I try to mention it casually in conversation, or I'll talk to them. I'll invite them to church a couple of times. If they keep rejecting me, I'll just be like, okay, well, that's when I really have to live out the word and show them who God is through how I act, what I say, my values, and all that.
I mean, I agree with Sarah in that, we're called as Christ followers to invest and love other people. I'm a lot of the same way of like who I've surrounded myself with. We're typically going in the same direction. So like my close, intimate friends, which I don't have many close friends, but like those that are, we're walking in the same direction. But if I were to only surround myself with those people and not actively like try to invest in people, that then am I doing my job what I believe my job is as a Christ follower? So, and like if you're trying to win them to Christ and you have no relationship with them, you're just telling them that they do wrong and they're going to go to hell. Like, seriously, as a believer, I've had people say that to me just like on the street, trying to hand me a tract and be like, where is your soul taken care of? And I'm like, yeah, I'm good, thanks. And they'll be like, are you sure? And it's like, okay, listen, like you're doing this all wrong. Like, you are going about this entirely the wrong way. I, like, generally speaking, I guess you could say I'm on your team and you're making me mad. Like, don't do that. So thinking about it from that perspective of like, how would I want somebody to treat me? And I try to do them the same way. Even if I don't agree with them, like, I'll have questions and I will do my absolute best to voice those questions as respectfully as possible. And I tend to get wrapped around the axle about stuff, of all things. But like, especially when it comes to this, it's so important. I really work on just trying to be like as respectful as possible, asking questions, and making sure that I fully understand where I'm coming from. Because I think a lot of Christ followers are just like, I believe this because I was told it my entire life. Okay, but why? But why? Do you know history of like, and all of it? Like, do you understand why you believe that?
Yeah.
And when we can't defend our faith logically, and sometimes it's not logical, but if we can't defend our faith and where we come from respectfully without telling someone that they're a moron, like that's not the way to do it. And I've seen that happen. Both sides. Name calling starts happening and it just goes downhill. So having conversations like this where it's respectful from all sides, even like on the hard topics of like abortion. Well, my vote, I don't vote for a party. I vote based on like moral values. And quite frankly, both of the main parties in power have a lot of issues. Like both of them do a lot of issues. And it's hard. It's hard to vote because I'm not just looking at a red or a blue ticket. I'm looking at what they voted for in the past. And anyway, so I really wish that there could be more conversations like this because it's like Dale said, like we're like this. We can't even come to the middle and discuss. We can't even have a conversation. And it's sad. It's very sad.
I think a lot of that too is because of what I think both of you have mentioned. But Amber, you just said they don't know their why behind what they believe.
Mm-hmm.
They've been told something, or they have this thing that was mentioned to them that they're like, I want this as a value. Like Dale mentioned earlier, that you grab onto it. You, like, for me, like if somebody says something to me that I don't know a lot about scripturally, I'll be like, okay, I can hold on to that for a little bit. I'm not going to be for it or against it necessarily right now, but it's something I need to look into and examine because I don't know anything about that. So, as believers, I think the people that get really angry and want to butt heads, they have this ideal that they're like, I believe this really vehemently, but they don't necessarily know why they do. So they get angry because they can't articulate the why.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Understanding where you're coming from and why is huge, and it is frustrating when you can't explain it, but that's your problem and not theirs. Does that make sense? Like, and I'm talking, me too. Like when I can't explain something, even if it's not about my faith, if I can't explain something and I'm like, this is really frustrating, but that's on me for not being able to explain it. It's not on that other person. But I think we've lost sight of that. I think we've lost sight, and this is a rabbit hole we could go down, of like, people have been dehumanized. Human beings, I think, as a general, have been dehumanized. I mean, because everything's been so polar. Democrat, Republican, vaxxed, unvaxxed. Like, it's been so polarized that we can't even have a conversation. And I hate that. I do. I really, really hate that. So, but
How do you, as believers, because I can speak to my own personal experience to this as a believer or a non-believer, either way. How would you deal with a rift that forms between you and someone that has been deep, when it comes to a foundational relationship in your life? For me, my mom was one of them, and then it wasn't even like coming out as gay that caused a rift between us. Like, the thing that caused a rift between us was like, oh no, I didn't perform at like one of the days of the revival at your church. Like, was the biggest rift that happened, and then separated ever since. And it was mainly because like I went to a different denomination than her for a long time. We were like Baptist, and we went to church together. We were doing everything together, and then suddenly I was like, hey, I'm gonna go to a new church and explore this other branch, and so I'm gonna find out what's right in scripture. And then bam, our relationship has been terrible ever since. And like, to me, that's not really an issue to get that bent over. We're still both Christians, and we both basically still believe almost the exact same thing. So nothing should have really caused a divide. But that was it. That was the start of it. Huge rift. And then, coming out as gay, only added to the rift, but the rift was already monumental by that time. But now it's just like, man, what kind of relationship do we have now? Like, we used to be, best friends. We used to have like the deepest relationship ever. Or maybe just looking back at it now, 2020 hindsight, maybe we didn't have that deep of a relationship. Maybe it was very superficial, and now maybe I'm romanticizing our relationship. Maybe it wasn't that deep. Maybe it was just, convenience or whatever. Who knows? But without taking value away from it, it was deep. A rift occurred, and then how do I get past that rift? Because now she's in a religious point of view, I'm from a non-religious point of view, and that rift between believers and non-believers is something that is real and something that is very difficult to get past. And it's like, are you going to hang on to them in your life? And if you are going to hang on to them, is it going to be the same as it was? Is it going to be as deep and as real as it was? Is it going to be as authentic as it was? And if it's not going to be as authentic as it was, why not? And can you get past that so it can continue to be as authentic as it was?
So go ahead. You go first.
Okay.
You go first.
I actually I have experience with this in both for both sides. So I have, and if she listens to this podcast, she might know who she is actually. um, but I have a friend that I grew up with. Well, that I didn't grow up with. I went through college with, and after college, and like we were best friends. We didn't believe the same thing, and it wasn't a big deal. But because we roomed together, we had some similar hobbies, and we had some similar interests, and we lived together, which was a big part, right? If you live together with someone, I feel like you kind of naturally grow closer to them just because of your vicinity. But because of some decisions that were made that were hard, we haven't been as close, but I haven't completely rejected the friendship itself because we have different beliefs. I feel like when you build deep bonds with somebody, you build them over values and morals initially. I think that we didn't build our friendship on that, so it's kind of like what you said, Dale. It was more based on interests. It might have been not as deep as I thought. But I still talk to this person. We still have conversations. We've butted heads over some issues like abortion or some political issues. But we try to have these conversations very respectfully, even though we are very passionate about our sides, and that's okay. I don't think that we'll ever be as close of friends, just because I wouldn't be able to come to her with problems in my life, because to be real, I don't think I would. I don't want necessarily the advice she would give me, because her advice would be more worldly, right? I want to go to somebody who I know is going to give me godly advice and steer me in the direction that I know that my heart and mind should be going. So I don't mind having conversations and being friends with her still, hanging out, doing things together. Like my sister is one of my best friends, and she is not necessarily a believer. I'm not really sure where she stands, but I talk to her almost every single day. We call, we hang out, we chat, we text. She doesn't believe the same thing, but we have familial bonds too. We have a lot of shared grievances in our family. So I think that's kind of what made that bond really strong. I'm not sure I could develop that bond with a non-believer that wasn't my family, if that makes sense.
Can you repeat the question so I make sure I'm answering the question?
When a rift does divide you and previous friend, like, what do you do with that rift? Is there a way to get over that rift to continue having a meaningful and deep relationship?
Okay. Yes. Thank you. So I've talked about this before on the podcast of, like, I come from a very long line of abusers. There are some huge generational bonds in my family line. My parents were the first ones to, like, we're not doing this anymore, that kind of thing. So there, quite frankly, within my extended family, there's been a lot of rift because I believe very differently than they do. And while I am fine with having a relationship with them, whether they believe the same way I do or not, they feel judged. So I think that overcoming a rift has to come from both both sides. So, like, if you can agree to disagree, like, then I think that you can overcome a rift. Now, I have some really strong beliefs about certain things, such as, like, sanctity of human life. And if one of my best friends were to come to me and say that she supports abortion, there would be, like, some conversations there. Now, would I just be like, "Oh, no, we're not friends anymore"? No. I'm just a little bit more mature than that. But I think if you don't line up on like the big issues, which I think that it's a natural thing that you might drift apart. It's not even, and it wouldn't even necessarily be malicious. I mean, just think about like your high school friends. I mean, for me, my high school friends, like I haven't talked to them in years, and it's not malicious. It's just like we don't have anything in common anymore. But if there is like a riff, like a situation you can go back to, then it's your responsibility as adults to come together and have that discussion. Where do we go from here? We had this riff. I felt like this or whatever, and talk it out. And again, it's a lost art. That's very situational, I feel like. And again, if you drift apart from someone, for me personally, if I drift apart from someone, it's not malicious. It's just, we may just not, it's not malicious. It just happens. That's my view.
Do you think that not capitalizing on investing in non-believers or people of other ways of life, I feel like that would somehow lessen your compassion or empathy towards others, because you're choosing to, like, if you choose not to really have them in your life in the same way anymore, like you're rejecting their way of life almost, like it's not compatible with your way of life. And you know, that is a situation that occurs with a lot of people, and it's an everyday occurrence. But like what I'm trying to say is, if you do choose to separate ways, do you feel like you're missing out on learning from other people's ways of life, and why do they believe the way that they believe, even if you do disagree with it? If they can find a way, or if they find it justifiable in their own eyes, I feel like trying to understand why they think it's justifiable, like, is valuable. Like understanding their perspective is super important to understanding everyone, and if you choose to reject it and not invest in it any further, I feel like it misses out on a huge opportunity to become more empathetic, or to become more compassionate or understanding about why it is people live the way they do, or chose to put value in something that you don't put value in. You know what I mean?
Sure. And on the flip side of that, then I mean, if they're rejecting my way of life as well, and if we just aren't compatible, I mean, completely, let's take faith out of the subject. Let's just take it out of the subject where it doesn't come from a faith-based or non-faith-based. If you just have two people, like they go on a date, we can take it from that perspective. They go on a date and they sit across the table from each other and they don't have anything in common. They, like, one of them loves to hike and one of them loves to play video games. Neither one is necessarily wrong, but they're just not compatible. They're not going to hang out. You're not going to have someone who's empathetic towards video games that loves to hike, but the person that plays video games is not going to be offended. Well, if they are, that's one. But like, they're not going to be offended by the fact that the hiker doesn't enjoy playing video games, right? They're just going to be like, okay, cool, this is a great dinner, but we're probably not going to be friends because we don't have a whole lot in common. That's kind of how I view it. Yes, can we learn
It
to
reminds me of like
be more
parents that try to make their kids hang out. It's just like, no,
empathetic?
you're forced to hang out.
Right. Right. And that's kind of the way I look at it, of like, we are going to naturally gravitate towards people with things that we have in common. And again, it's not like we're going to agree on absolutely everything, but like our fundamental beliefs, like your fundamental beliefs are different than mine. And while you and I feel like have had a great conversation, all three of us have had a great conversation. Like, if we hadn't have been introduced, we would have never crossed paths. Like, if Sarah hadn't have introduced it, does that make sense? And it's not
Yeah.
not a malicious. That's the word. It's not a malicious thing. It's just like it's a natural flow of life. But yeah, so that's kind of how I look at it. Yes, I can always learn to be more empathetic and learn from other people's way of life. But again, coming at it from your perspective of chewing it, and then if it works, it does spitting. If it doesn't work, spitting it out, then it's kind of the same thing.
I have never been great at empathy, but I've worked on it for a very long time. So I have come a long way from where I was. But saying that, I was trying to think. I was racking my brain on if I've ever ended a friendship, if I have ever ended a friendship from my side because of what somebody believes. So I'm trying to think, and somebody maybe somewhere has been like, yes, you did this. I can't remember currently, but I do know of friendships that have ended from their side because they didn't like what I believed. They didn't want to discuss it in a kindly manner. But saying that, and I know that Amber will probably be on the same page as me here, but when I have these conversations with people, because I know that Amber has studied other religions too, I think it's important for us to know where people are coming from. Like, I have a friend that is really into crystals and tarot cards and stuff like that, and that's okay. Like, and I've asked her questions. I'm like, oh, well, what is this? What is that? And like, I want to know like what she believes and where this is coming from and all this, because for one, not only just because I want to know where she's coming from so I can understand her better. Two, I can't bring Jesus to her if I don't know where she's at. And three, I need to know how to maneuver through the friendship better too. So like, I don't mind sitting down and learning different perspectives and figuring out where people are coming from like a more empathetic standpoint. But like, at the end of the day, when that conversation is over, can I invest deeply in them? I cannot understand people like Jesus did because I am not Jesus. I can try to plant seeds. I can try to be a good friend. I can try to project Jesus as much as I can with the time that I have with that person. But I don't know if I could protect my heart the way that I'm supposed to and have those deep friendships with people that don't believe the same thing as me, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And there's only one friendship that I can think of that from my side I was like, okay. And the only reason that I cut the friendship was because she hated what I believed so much. Like, she was sending me long messages. Like, I wasn't even engaging in the conversation. I was just like, okay, I was trying to just like let it go, because she obviously knew where I stand, because she had a very strong opinion on it. But like, it was one of those where I knew no matter what I said, she was going to or no matter how I said it, she was going to take offense to it. Because I had tried to, like, okay, we've been friends a really long time. Like, and I had tried to kind of come at it from this conversation, but she just kept like escalating. And I was like, and it finally got to the point where the messages were like calling names, being mean. And I was like, okay, that's enough. That's enough. That is the only friendship that I can say that from my side, was like, we're done. Because I've tried my best to be respectful. I am not going to let you call me names, because it's not necessary. We are literally in our 30s. We are not in high school. Like, we're not going to do this.
I do want to say, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted a quick disclaimer for like what I said a second ago. I don't think I've like initiated any ending of friendships. I will say that some of those ending of friendships might have been my fault. I'm not saying I was perfect in those times where I might have said something that was like not great. So some of that might have been deserved, but sometimes it is not deserved. And I just wanted to say that I'm not perfect, and that happens sometimes.
The last thing that I want to be is hypocritical. Like, I will absolutely 100% come out and say I am, like, I'm messed up. Like, I struggle with stuff, and like, I really try to be like, I'm so messed up. Like, there's just things that I've struggled with, and like, and so something that someone else struggles with, if I disagree with what they're doing or how they're doing it based on my bias, based on what I believe scripture says, that doesn't automatically mean that I don't like them or that I'm not going to just blatantly disassociate with them. Anyway.
I have it's funny because like when you're on a specific side, or no matter what side you're on, you always have experiences. So when I was on the Pentecostal side of things, I went out to IHOP, I think is what it was, with my pastor, and there were some Middle Eastern folks that were sitting at a table near us, like behind us or something, and like he was just like, oh, do you feel uncomfortable in your spirit? I just feel so uncomfortable in my spirit, just because just because they're what, Middle Eastern, you're assuming they're Muslim, and if you think they're Muslim, they're automatically like evil and anti-Christian, which can be true with some radical Muslims, you know what I mean? But like that kind of vibe, it's so toxic, no matter who it's from, no matter
it can be.
who that's
Yes.
from.
Yeah.
To make
And that's something that we have to be really careful about. Like, no matter what side you're to just look at someone and judge them strictly based on what they look like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it can be, yeah. Oh, I hate that. I hate that you had that experience. So, because you can't tell. You can't tell what someone believes or doesn't believe just by looking at them.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's a whole other topic.
So, Dale, to kind of close us out, for you, where you are now, have you had luck as far as like having Christians live respectfully with your way of life or the people you're around, or are you more in conflict, do you feel like? And do you come into contact with Christians like on a day-to-day basis? Like, what does that look like for you?
I mean, I've probably come in contact with Christians all the time since the majority of the nation is Christian, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I can ever not come in contact with a Christian, which that's more debatable as time goes on, whether this is a Christian nation or not. But
I would say not.
you know, right? Like
Yeah.
the people that I work with, faculty members that I work with, because I'm a teacher, getting to know the new faculty here at the school that I'm working at, I do know that some of them are definite Christians because whenever they're getting to know me, I'm just like, oh yeah, I moved out here. And they're like, oh, why'd you move out here? And I'm like, my fiance. And I say, oh, you're getting married? What's her name? Like, well, his name is Dan. And as soon as that kind of like gets out there, it becomes pretty obvious whether they're going to be for or against, shutting the conversation down or moving forward with that conversation. Because, coming out as gay to someone in a conversation upon meeting them, like first impression, hey, just so you know, I'm gay, will immediately determine whether this conversation is going to go on or end. So for me, it's a pretty easy indicator. If I can get that out pretty early in the conversation, it's easy to tell whether them as a Christian or non-Christian, doesn't matter either way, whether they're going to move on with this interaction.
So from your perspective, is there anything that me and Amber missed that would help Christians to live more peaceably with non-Christians? Like as far as like how me and Amber have described how we approach things.
I think just considering where people are always coming from, without making any assumptions whatsoever, just consider where someone else is coming from. And even if they are out front telling you or talking about something that you disagree with wholeheartedly, even if it's something like that, maybe they're saying it because they do agree with it wholeheartedly and they have justifiable reasons why. That's what I would say. Like, if both sides have justifiable reasons why they're living the way that they're living, I feel like it's worth the effort to figure out what those justifiable reasons are. Like those justifiable reasons are the basis for why all of us do anything, and whether you can be compatible with that person or not. And even if you can't be compatible with someone after figuring out what they believe or what they don't believe, just to let them live their way of life. If it's not hurting you, and if it's not, well, actually, I would say just mainly that. If it's not hurting you, let them live. Let them live. Let you live. Let people live.
So I think that it is possible for us to be in the same space. Our society, sadly, is trying to polarize instead of, like I said, coming and having conversations. They just try to polarize. And I think that we as Christians and Christ followers could do a better job of starting the conversation, but starting it well. Not handing somebody a track and telling them they're going to hell when you don't even know their name. Like that's the wrong way to do it. And I think that we could just do better about that. I'm very firm in my beliefs, but I'm also still learning a lot. Like, I'm still learning so much. And I think that we as Christ followers need to be willing to learn, because we just need to be willing to learn. Know your foundation, know what you believe and why, and be willing to learn.
This is going to be a weird
So,
one, but I feel like whenever you ask me what I think Christians might be able to do better, one of the biggest things I feel like, if you can have a conversation with somebody without mentioning scripture in any way, beautiful. Because as soon as you mention scripture, they automatically know, like, oh, and then they stop. Like, they're gonna shut down and be like, oh, never mind, they're one of those. Because as if it was me, coming from a non-religious point of view, and if someone walks up to me and starts talking, and we are having a good old conversation, I'm just like, oh yeah, why would you do that? It's like, oh well, in John 4:7, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm done with this conversation. I don't want to hear because of John. I don't want to hear because of scripture or because of God or this is blah blah blah. Like, I want to hear why it is you have the convictions you have. Like, so if you're going to talk to me and we're having a conversation about, like, well, I believe all life is sacred, that's why, like, I feel like we shouldn't do abortions. Cool. Expand off of that. Expand off of where that value is coming from and why you think life is sacred without mentioning scripture or God, because then I'll be way more interested in hearing, like, your why. That's the justifiable reason why. If the baseline is God, like, cool, that should be like the very last thing you say. Interest somebody up until that point. You know what I mean? Because if the final source is God or the final source is scripture, cool. I'll be way more interested in what God or scripture stands for if you give me the justification first. You know what I mean? If you just give me God as the answer way before you give me the justification, I'm going to be less interested in God. Give me the justification, and if I agree with the justification and then tell me God after, I'm going to be like, cool, I liked your justification to begin with, but the fact that God also believes in that justification makes me like your God. But if you just say God first, I'm tuned out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, and coming from someone that my life and the decisions that I make are based off of scripture. While I do my best to learn where other people are coming from and everything, I totally hear what you're saying. It's
The reason is because it makes it
like
real. It makes it authentic and genuine. If you tell me, like, I don't believe in abortion and this is the justifiable reasons why, and base it off of that stuff, and it's from personal experience and it's from you, like, I feel like it's authentic and it's genuine and it's based off of somewhere that's very sacred to you as a person, and then God's also behind that. That's cool. You know what I mean? Like, I want to hear authenticity. And whenever you bring up
I
scripture
hear
or
what you're
God,
saying.
I immediately will kind of like blind over and gloss over, because I'm just like, that's not relatable. First of all, scripture and God, not relatable. And secondly, not authentic to me. God's not authentic to me. So if you're going to talk to me, you need to make it real to me and you need to make it authentic to me. And the only way you're going to do that is if you make it based off of justifiable reasons from your personal experience as opposed to scripture and God. Those should be like last. in my
So what you're
opinion. My
saying
opinion.
is like if I don't have any personal experience with abortion, well, if we're going down this trail, if I don't have any personal, like I've never had an abortion,
Well,
um,
you have a baseline in the conversation first of all because you have kids. So just because you haven't had an abortion doesn't mean you haven't experienced in this topic or a reason to believe why you believe. You're a woman, so first off, you have a lot to say about it. Secondly, you have kids, so you have way more to say about it. You know what I mean? Like that's enough. You don't have to have had an abortion. You don't have to have had to think about abortion to make the conversation relevant and authentic and real to me. Like you can just come from that experience by itself, and that's enough for me.
okay. Okay, that makes sense. And that was what I was trying to clarify was like if I don't have any experience with it, but I mean the personal experience that that I have is my son was born at 39 weeks and 5 days. And there are a few states that he could have been aborted up to 39 weeks, which was just 4 days before he was born. Me looking at him when he was born I was thinking like it didn't compute with me on how a woman could abort. I does it even to the very beginning, but especially that late. So that would be my approach on that as well. But I hear what you're saying, having it come from a more authentic, and I do hear that. I really do.
What's
So
funny is
thank you for sharing.
When I come into debates like this, I actually don't want people to know that I'm a Christian because they will assume my stance on everything already and they'll just argue.
That's right.
So I will say this is why I believe this, and like we'll go back and forth and like you only believe that because you're a Christian. I'm like no, like there are non-Christians that also believe the same way that I do because here are the facts that I base my decision on. So that drives me insane. I'm just like you can't assume that I'm a Christian just because of what I believe. I mean, I am a Christian though, but don't assume like you know me.
You can't assume your stance based on what you believe.
Yeah.
Right? Or you can't assume your stance based on a label, right?
Don't label me based on my stance either, though. Just like I shouldn't be
Just
like,
Sure.
oh, you
just
are
don't
for
label me.
abortion. You must not be a Christian, right? That would be me labeling
Yep.
you.
This conversation could have gone forever long. There's so much to say about it.
I know.
And I feel like
There's a
everything we
lot.
said was just very surface and nothing was like very deep. I wanted to, because I can also
And we
relate
talked for 2
to,
hours.
I know, as a non-believer talking to a believer, you can connect the two terminologies, like if you just listen to the person, because, from a Christian point of view, talking about the God, talking about God and how he talks to you, or the spirit and, like living inside of you or whatever, like it's weird for a non-believer to listen to that and understand what you're talking about, like God and spirit, and like how are you listening to God? Does he actually talk to you audibly? How does that work? Or all that mess. But then you had talked to a non-believer like me, who I really am into the topic of consciousness right now. Just whether people have a higher consciousness or whether people are on a lower consciousness, and what that means and how people behave according to those different consciousness. Because even from a non-believer's point of view, we would label your guys's consciousness as Christ consciousness. That's what he brought to earth. He brought a Christ consciousness, which was compassion and empathy and trying to bring everyone together. It was very considerate of all people, of all backgrounds. It was taking everyone in consideration without trying to step on toes or being offensive. That's like a Christ consciousness, and it's really beautiful, when you take it in that context, as opposed to from like a Christian context where it can come from a very ugly point of view, all depending on what experience you had with it. Like listening to like someone talk about Christ consciousness is a really beautiful thing.
It's an interesting point of view because Jesus was crucified because of his beliefs. So he came in, and while he met the needs of the most needy people, he also pissed off some really important people. See my air quotes, really important. So, I mean, like, he made a lot of people mad. They wouldn't have tried to crucify him if he didn't make them mad. So he came in meeting the people where they were, but he also made a lot of people mad in the process. And I think that a lot of times we as Christ followers can only do so much of, like, we're doing our best. I say me, I know for me, I am doing my best to meet people where they are, to love on them, and that kind of thing. At the same time, there's going to be people that don't like me simply because of how I believe. So anyway, like, it's an interesting thought, the Christ consciousness. I see what they're saying. On the flip side of that, he stirred the whole world up by coming. So maybe I misunderstood what you said. And if I did, I'm open to hearing it. It's just an interesting viewpoint.
There's a lot to be said further about it, but I need to eat food.
Yeah, you need to go eat.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And it was a lot of fun talking about it. If we don't have to have a podcast next time, we could just talk.
That's true. If you want to just hang out.
Totally. That's totally. I'm open to that. But it was very nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It was nice to meet you. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks for hanging out with us. My name is Sarah Hoffman. You can find me on Instagram at MommyMakeMomFace. You can find Amber on Instagram at RefinedByIron. Please go like and follow our Instagram, JesusCoffeeBarbells. Send any questions or comments to our email at JesusCoffeeBarbells@gmail.com. Next week, we will be discussing delivering truth with grace. So we hope to see you there. Thanks for joining us.